It's my pleasure to interview Bob Knott today. I've known Bob since 1973 when I came to Mars Hill College, and he's been in many ways a mentor to me all of the years that I was here. And I think, for good or bad, he's the first person to find an administrative position for me where he, behind the scenes, helped me take over the freshman orientation program. I think it was the second or third year I was here. So I have a lot to him to be grateful for in many ways. So it's a pleasure to interview you today, Bob.
Jim, it's great to be here and good to be with you, fella. You have brought an awful lot to Mars Hill College over the years. Very fortunate to have you.
I appreciate that. Bob, tell us a little bit about your background and particularly where you grew up, where you're from, and how you ended up coming to Mars Hill College.
I was a normal young lad till about the age of I grew up in Winston-Salem, ended up at Wake Forest College then, now university. And I was actually back there studying for a master's degree in philosophy and religion and teaching math when I was contacted by Dick Hoffman about the possibility of coming to Mars Hill College. This was 1968, 69 in that period. I actually came to Mars Hill in 1969. And Dick was working on a proposal with folk like Earl Leininger, Bill Walker, John Huff, Page, Lee, David Nisler. They were working on an internship program and a proposal to the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. And they got the grant, which established 3 new positions in what Dick called the Community Development Institute. And I was one of those 3 that came in and taught. Actually, half my load early on was directing the internship side of that. And that program ran largely off of Great Society money coming out of the Johnson administration through the Opportunity Corporation here in Buncombe and Madison County. And for a while there, we had up to 200 students a semester out in the community doing a wide variety of things. Z. Smith Reynolds was very interested in tutoring, so we had a lot of kids out tutoring in the mountain communities. That led to my working very, very closely with Dick Hoffman, and he was the primary reason I came to Mars Hill College. Dick was very persuasive, charismatic, just full of himself and full of energy, and he wanted to be part of that, or at least we did. Brenda and I both were taken to Dick. And then when we met the others, like I say, Earl and Page, Bill, David, many of us there, we just felt at home, so we moved here. Within a year, I was working with the general education program. Dick was a new dean, and new deans always put in a new general education program, so we started on that. And one thing led to another. It was during that time, working with Dick, that we found you, brought you in to enrich us. And I think in many ways, under Dick's leadership and Fred Bentley's overall guidance, really, for the institution, the character of Mars Hill College as a senior institution.
Do you know the origins of the idea of the Community Development Institute? Was that essentially Dick's idea, and then he went ahead and wrote that?
Yes, that's my understanding. That Dick had that interest well before I got here. And of course, I did not know Dick Hoffman before that spring of '69, I guess, or February when I met him for the first time. And at that time, the grant was not fully confirmed. It was well on its way. And the interview, the outcome of hiring was going to be contingent upon the funding of that grant. And Jimmy Reynolds, one of the family members, was very interested in tutoring, particularly kids in the mountain area. He and Dick hit it off, and that led to the funding. And the Community Development Institute was, if you know much about Dick, Saul Alinsky and community development, Dick was deeply influenced by that. And he himself was interested in the political side of the area, supportive of the educational side as far as the schools were concerned. But this was really a belief that he and others had, that if you could enrich the classroom with learning out in the communities, you could really affect a student's education much more profoundly than if you just had the classroom alone. And he also believed, with others particularly, who would have been here when you came, folk like Don Anderson, who really took it upon themselves to see what they could do to help the mountain communities.
Right. And your role in that, you said that you taught. Did you also supervise some of these internships or help create some of these internships as well?
Yes, my primary role was to teach 3 courses a semester, and that was sociology and some philosophy. They didn't trust me with religion at that stage. And then to spend the rest of that time working in the community to generate placements.
Yeah.
The entities in the community that received our students did not have to put up resources to bring those students in, because the grant brought with it the resources. Now, we did get some support from the Opportunity Corporation. And one of the real difficulties in making all that work was getting the folk in the organizations and community entities on the same page with us when it came to what we wanted for our students.
Right.
They saw the students as just extra manpower.
Yeah.
And that took a lot of time, just sitting and talking and working. And when they found out we really wanted more than just a place for students to file papers, they were sometimes less enthusiastic about all the time it would take from them to oversee these students. But that changed over time, and we had some awfully good students come through that furthered the program. So I guess the piece of it that I remember the most is the tutoring.
Can you talk a little bit about, this idea was essentially Dick Hoffman's, he wrote the grant that essentially started it, about the role of the president, President Bentley, during this period of time?
Some of the others who were here when the college was going through its accreditation, first accreditation as a senior institution, can fill you in a little more on the details. My knowledge of that is secondhand. But the college had a difficult transition from junior to senior level status, and I think the year was 1967. That would have been before I arrived. Went through a full accreditation visit with Southern Association, and the stories I heard from folk here, but primarily from my contacts down at the Southern Association, were that college was not going to be accredited as a senior institution. It was going to be told, you have more work to do.
Right.
And that's where Fred Bentley's leadership and vision, I think, really got the college over that hurdle. He took the visiting team into Asheville and hosted them very graciously and generously. And the word I got was that when they were here that afternoon, they were already drawing up their recommendations to say you have more work to do. And then by the morning when they left, the next morning, they had given the college its accreditation with follow-up.
I see.
And I really saw that ability to buffer between the college and the external agencies and communities as Fred Bentley's strength. And working.
And he essentially let Dick handle the academic side of the institution while he provided funds and in a sense defended it from particular problems outside the college.
I never knew Fred Bentley to intrude in any type of way into the academic side of the institution. Very interested in it, of course, with his music background and his interests not only were in the arts but also in architecture. And you see his imprint on, this building that we're in right now was unusual at the time, underground structure. Fred really loved to spend his time there, but also he was very effective on his feet. When he was put under pressure And the college was getting pressure from the Baptist State Convention at that time.
We always joke that Wake Forest and Meredith were down where the Baptist community could see everything they did, and so they were under fire constantly. We were way out on the fringe up in the mountains, and we felt that we were buffered by some of that. And I don't want all that to sound negative.
Right.
Very strong and positive relationships. But Baptists took a strong stand against no college could accept any federal money. And Fred led the way with the convention in getting that overturned. That was a real sore spot for Wake Forest and the medical school, because without federal resources, they couldn't make it. The rest of us didn't have it at that time. And at that stage, there was no state aid to the private colleges. That came along in the 70s. And Fred was instrumental in getting that through in Raleigh with the powers that be, with the Independent College Association of North Carolina, but also with the Baptist State Convention, by arguing that money goes to the student who brings it to the college. It's not direct aid to the college. But then we received, during the 70s, well, you were here for part of that, a Title III grant, a Developing Institutions grant, which was direct aid to the college. And I may be wrong, but I think Mars Hill was the first Baptist college in the state to receive that aid. Concerns about, I joked a little bit about our not being able to teach religion, but we had some strange religion professors here during that time.
I knew
with Earl and Page and the whole group going up. No, it was a really strong department. But there were times when the Baptist Convention and its leadership would not be in tune with where we might be going and teaching and working. And Fred really served as an extraordinary buffer for that. He could speak well, he was articulate, he defended what we were trying to do with our curriculum, with our program. And he really spent more of his time out there doing those things than he did back here right on the campus. And I think that was largely because he trusted Dick Hoffman.
Okay, very interesting. In fact, many of the things you say have been reinforced by other people that we've talked to. Can you talk a little bit about the transition from the Community Development Institute in regards to your work with that in developing, as you said, a general studies program for Mars Hill College? When did that come about? And I'm curious to know your role in developing that curriculum and Dick's role in developing that new general studies curriculum.
When I was interviewed in the spring, or February, March of 1969, Dick was not yet dean. He was under consideration. There was a split, as I understand it, and again, others can speak to that better than I because I was not here, but there was a split in the faculty. There was one dean could have taken it very much toward the conservative side of Baptist life. Dick was more of what you would call today a progressive on that side, even though that Mennonite background shone through everything he did, really. And I hope you have some of his wonderful stories about the chickens and the farm and all in Pennsylvania. But here was this Mennonite ex-Marine who was now dean of the faculty. But as I understand it, Dick was almost if not a compromise dean, he was one that several of the faculty asked to step forward and to try to bring a new direction to the college. And in talking with Fred Bentley, I think Fred was open to either direction at that point. He could have gone either way. Dick, with that core of faculty who really took it upon themselves to get him elected as the dean. And like I say, there was a strong division in the faculty over that direction. So the Community Development Institute, which was Dick's baby, was established, but then to integrate that along with other directions into the curriculum, general education became the place to do it. And I think that by that time, Dick and I had developed a very strong personal relationship as well as professional. And Dick asked me if I would be willing to lead a general education committee to do this. I think the reason that I was asked to do it is I was brand new. I was not associated with the division, and he was trying to build bridges in the faculty. And I was not threatening at that stage because he didn't know enough about me to know which side I would be threatening to. We put together a committee. If my memory is correct, there were 8 on the committee. We took a book, Philip Phoenix, it's either Realms of Meaning. Realms of Meaning. And we organized the curriculum around those ways of knowing, as Phoenix talked with them. It was a nice tool to get us organized. Worked on distinctive courses, programs of study in each of those areas. And then after about a year and a half, almost 2 years of that, it came to the faculty for a vote. And I remember as a young, inexperienced administrator, and my only experience had really been teaching some math at Wake Forest before I came to teach on the Mars Hill College faculty in these other areas. I went into Dick, and after the first year, I said, Dick, I think we've got a good proposal and we're ready to carry it forward. He said, that's good to hear, Bob. I've read it. What's the vote? Yeah. I said, well, I don't know. I said, that's why we want to take it to the faculty. I never will forget sitting on that couch in his office that day. He had that little stuffed chair that was off to the side, his chair, and we would all sit in the others, the couch and the folding chair. And he said, Bob, I said, no, I said, that's not the way it works. He said, you don't take it till the faculty until you know what the vote is. So that's when Earl and Page and Ellison, Jenks was, he prided himself on counting the faculty votes, and so he was Dick's undercover agent and figured out what all the votes were going to be. And about halfway through the next year, we had the votes. And Dick said, okay, we can take it to the floor. And sure enough, there was a vigorous debate. I remember math faculty was very uneasy with changing the math requirement to logic and statistics. That was not college algebra as they had taught it. But they affirmed it, and all the other pieces fell in place, and we had a good run.
The way you describe it is that it generated out of the faculty. You got a group of faculty members, but Dick, and what Dick's role in that was the political role to make sure that there were votes to get it through. Did he play a major role in developing, or did he leave that to you in the faculty?
He left that to us. Now he was in not all of those sessions, but whenever we had the summary meetings to get consensus, where are we, where are we going, Dick was there. And Dick had a marvelous way of asking the very practical questions. You'd be caught up in, as academics, theorizing and putting it all together, and Dick would say, oh, that sounds good. Now, how would this work? How many sections of mathematics are you going to be able to offer, and how many are going to go, you know, that type of
the nuts and bolts part.
That's right. And he didn't dwell on those, but he wanted to make sure you can answer those questions.
Right.
Because he knew before the faculty, it'd come apart if you couldn't answer the questions. So we'd go off, do our homework, come back. But Dick also was, he was able, and I think it's fair to say, he was able to talk with every member of the faculty, even those who rather strongly disagreed with the direction he might be taking things, who wanted it to be much more on the conservative side, socially and theologically. Dick was, he'd go to your office, sit down and talk with you. He didn't just sit up there on the top floor of Moore Administration Building. He was out all the time. And he would deliberately seek out those with whom there were significant differences. Had a wonderful way of building bridges across that. And I always respected that in him, admired that in him. That was the politician there, and not in a negative sense.
That vote came, by the way, my first spring at Mars Hill College in the spring of 1974.
That's right.
And I can remember very well the faculty meeting was very tense, and I remember being prodded by both sides as to which way to vote. And I can remember a faculty member standing up. Dick had made his appeal for it, and I remember a faculty member standing up and came very, very close to the line of what I would say would be a personal attack and on Dick, and you could feel the atmosphere in the room change, and hands that went up that voted for it, I think, were doing a lot of it in sympathetic for a man that they respected, who they felt had been attacked unfairly by another faculty member. But I can remember that vote very clearly, and as a very freshman faculty.
It was tense going into that, and one of Dick's strengths was he could absorb those personal
Exactly,
attacks.
yeah. That was what was critical, I think, his ability to take it without fighting back.
He would joke about it, but he would not publicly, and I never knew him privately to attack anyone personally, as you say. And I think people, even who didn't know him, came to respect that in Dick and followed his leadership. He did put his deanship on the line with that vote.
Right, exactly.
That direction. And I think, Jim, that really was the maturing of Marsfield College as a senior institution. It was a long transition from junior to senior status. And I don't mean we didn't have the majors and the programs to offer, but it was a coalescing around an identity for the college. And then that went out really nationwide.
Yeah.
I mean, I was constantly invited to tell us what's happening at Marsfield College. And Fred was a big part of that, Fred Bentley, because he put the word out as to what was going on. Dick really didn't enjoy those meetings. He would go, and we would, on the way there, playing Chicago, presenting. Now, Bob, you take this and you do this. Good, Dick. What part you gonna have? He said, I'm going to be right there supporting you. We'll just go right ahead with this. But that was not what he liked to do. Now, he loved the interchange, the give and take, the question and answer when it was over. He just didn't want to get up and make some big speech about what was happening. But he and Fred Bentley were really a fine team together. Fred very much left the running of the campus to Dick. And that included virtually all aspects. We tried to integrate of campus life. We tried to integrate student life much more directly in with the curricular aspect, get the faculty involved. We had something called an inquiry seminar. You may have taught
Yeah, I remember that.
And that left us as faculty sort of hanging out there, because you were supposed to work with your group of freshmen to come up with a topic and then do the research and all.
Yeah.
And we weren't quite used to that. We were used to going in with a textbook.
Right, and doing a lecture.
Tell them how it was going to be
Exactly.
done. And so we worked with campus life, student life, to try to integrate student campus experiences. All the while, the Community Development Institute was continuing to go along, and more of those internships were integrated into the general studies curriculum, but then into the major.
Yeah, I remember it very strongly into the major when I came here.
Yeah.
I'm curious, a couple of things. I remember that much of that was founded by Kellogg. Did you write the Kellogg?
Yes, I was involved in that. And a number of us were involved in putting that together, and Dick and I spent a great deal of time traveling to Grand Rapids to get that. I remember one time we went in through Flint, Michigan, and it was ice cold. We got on a little commuter to head out to Grand Rapids, and you couldn't stand up fully in it was a little tube with wings. And so here we were going in, and I was bent over at the waist trying to get back down there. Sat down beside Dick, who was right ahead of me, and he didn't even crack a smile, didn't even look at me. He just said, "There's some advantages to being short."
I could agree with that in that case. How was in putting this together, your relationship with Fred Bentley at the time?
My relationship early on was almost exclusively with Dick at the administrative level. I only got to know Fred probably 3 years after I had been here. Like I say, Fred was pretty much out there working with external agencies, donors, relationships like that. My meetings with him were fairly formal, straightforward. I remember during that early second year, I guess, Dick asked me to put together a fact book. We didn't have institutional research at the college as a position. So I spent the summer putting together a fact book. And therefore, that fall then, I was asked to ride herd on the enrollment figures and everything that was developing. And that was a time of fairly rapid growth at the college. We were making some very good progress then, as many schools were in the late 60s and early 70s. And the first day of registration, I was coming upstairs from the registrar's office. Bob had given me the figures, and I went up and I passed Dr. Bentley and Fred on the steps. He said, well, what's enrollment look like? And I said, well, we'll know by the end of the week. He said, oh, let me see it today. What do we have today? Well, I gave him the figures, standing out there on the steps. Just he and I, no one else. This thing's late in the day, no one else around. And I thought he was going to bite the pipe off. He had it, had his pipe in his mouth, chewed down on that. Well, we were probably 65 students short of where we ultimately ended up. Upperclassmen had figured out you didn't have to register on the first day. You just wrote it out. And I thought he was going to pitch a fit there because he was known to do that occasionally when he would get upset with things. He didn't. He just, anyway, he accepted my explanation. And then by the end of the week, we were where we had targeted enrollment would be. And I kidded him for years. I said, you have never asked me for an enrollment figure since that day until the end of registration. But it was that type of fairly formal relationship. Then I went back to complete a doctorate at Buffalo. And
what year did you leave, Bob?
That was 72, 73 that I was away, because it was 73, 74 when you were when you came in. And for a variety of reasons, I think personal but professional interest and just other circumstances, I was brought into a much closer relationship with Fred Bentley during that time, and really came to see him as colleague and friend in a way I had not known him before then. And spent some time with him down at the lake house, where Fred would kick back and would talk about some of the struggles, the people he was dealing with, and why and how he was trying to deal with it. And that's where I really got my insight into the battles he was fighting for us off campus. Because he pretty much shielded us from some of those attacks that we were not. I mean, we had folks sent in to monitor the religion department's classes and see what texts they were assigning and that type of thing. But when he found out about it, he cut it off immediately and just wouldn't let it happen. So in that sense, he was a strong buffer. Then I watched him, I went with him, he invited me to go with him to several of the associations. There was an old council for the advancement of small colleges, which is now Council for Independent Colleges. Fred was very active with that, very active with the Southern Association. And I watched him with his peers out there. And that's where I saw the strength he had to articulate a task for the group, kept them on task, a lot of it by the seat of his pants, just working with the meeting. Fred didn't give a lot of speeches. Pretty much that type of interchange. But I saw that the struggle for Dick and some of us back on the academic side was to keep him well enough informed about what we were doing that he wouldn't inadvertently take the legs out from under where we were trying to go.
But he would have never done that. I mean, what you're saying is that there was a total support for the academic side.
There was, during that period of time, in the early 80s, financial pressures came in, and it was a very painful time, as you well know, for everyone. And one thing I deeply respected about Fred and Dick with that was they said that it's going to be painful for all of us, but we're all going to share in this pain. It was not President and Dean will be off here and everybody else will pay the price. They really took their hits as well as everyone else did.
Bob, when did you leave to go on to another institution? What year was that?
75.
75. And you were gone from 75 until?
Until 80.
Okay. Could you tell a difference in the institution when you came back in '80? I know that you kept relationships with your friends here, particularly with Dick, because I know you were good friends throughout your two careers, even though you might have been separated. But did you feel a change in the nature of the institution when you came back?
I felt there was a maturing of the institution. I think the rawness that was there when the split occurred about over which direction the institution would take as a senior institution, I did not feel that when I came back in 1980. I felt like the direction was pretty well accepted and set, and now it was a question of how do we make this work? And as with any personal life or institutional life, some of all that newness had worn off, and now it was, let's grind it out and make some of these things happen. And there was an anticipation of some enrollment struggles that were beginning to come in there. But in terms of fundamental character, no.
Okay.
No. I've always thought that the strength of Mars Hill College is its faculty. I mean, that was, Dick was one of those. That's what brought us, Brenda and myself, but me in particular, to Mars Hill. Never been disappointed by that faculty, and it's well, back here in the late 1999, I guess, when I came back and worked with the faculty, you and your colleagues on curricular development, there was just this dedication to the good of the whole, that people would set aside smaller differences and cooperate on things that they might individually say, I'm not sure I feel real good about that. But they had their say, and then move on. I found that character in the institution in 1980 when I came back.
So it had less squabbles, less conflict within the faculty on ideological issues or pedagogical issues.
That, and I think that came from a firmer sense of direction that had just come with that maturity.
Okay.
That Dick's leadership on the academic side and Fred's support from the president's office had brought about. But it was really the faculty that took it, made it, and continued to make it.
Okay. Bob, can you talk a little bit in that curriculum that you and others developed in the 1970s with organized around ways of knowing. Can you talk a little bit about the notion that it was competence-based? And what does that mean, and what did it mean to people back then?
Jim, in the late 60s, there began to be a movement that was, I think in its origins, it really came out of management by objectives that spilled over into curricula for higher education and elementary, secondary, really, of competency-based education or competency curriculum. We did not go with the MBO piece of that wholesale. What we did find, though, was that if you could build consensus around a set of outcomes, expectations of performance, behavior, values, just we crossed the whole spectrum there, for your students, then it gave you much more flexibility in developing your curriculum because you didn't tie it down specifically to particular content. You opened up the range of content, but where you held the line was on what do students need to know and do as they come out of this. We even had a whole dimension of that that was the affective side. How do you feel when you deal with these things? That movement had a great deal of currency in the 70s. And we were out there ahead of most in putting that in place. Alverno College, Milwaukee, was one. I never will forget Sister Joelle Reed, who led them. I was on a panel with her. She said the faculty voted one Friday afternoon. Now, this was a faculty of nuns. Sisters voted to put in this competency-based curriculum. And she said that she stood up in the meeting and said, my God, what we have done. And then as she went out the door and it hit her what the changes were going to be, my God, what have we done? And so it was a little bit of that type of vote for us. We came up with a fairly elaborate, meaning the faculty and I, with Dick's leadership, came up with a fairly elaborate set of competencies. We tried to get away from the competency label that was there, so we called it a competence-based curriculum, meaning the whole person,
right,
as that person comes through. A lot of people were interested in that, and the college was asked to present what we were doing, its ideas. I never will forget at an AAHE meeting in Chicago, I was presenting, and the first question out was, this gentleman stood up, there were probably 300 in the audience, it was that popular, not Mars Hill, but the topic. And this fellow said, Dr. Knott, that's a Baptist institution. I said, yes. Said, do you require your students to express a certain set of beliefs when they come out of that institution? Is that part of the competency curriculum? And I said, no, but we do have a baptismal pit right beside the podium at graduation, and we just dumped the students. Well, he got up and stormed out of the meeting.
Some people can't take a joke.
My work at humor didn't go across very well with me. But it was that whole time of trying to ask, how do you assess students well in more than just areas of knowledge?
Yeah.
Now, we know in graduate school, we know what the skills are, and but what about those undergraduates? So the faculty here was really on the cutting edge in many respects, and wrestling with those. We put it in place. In fact, I think the first major program that went that way was theater. And C. Robert, Jim, were here putting experiences together to serve a set. I think they had about 10 competences that they expected of all their majors coming through. That never happened across the whole faculty. No. It took hold in certain places. I think you could see why theater might lend itself maybe a little more to that than some others. And then assessing students well, fairly, thoroughly, in areas beyond the classroom. And by the way, part of the reason it came in was trying to incorporate those internships.
Right.
What do you learn from this? And reflection on the experience was a part of the competence curriculum. It became very cumbersome in trying to set up the assessment mechanisms that went with that. And so I think over time, that emphasis sort of atrophied and quietly died out, while the structure of what was put in place remained.
I have to think also that it actually had a greater impact on, rather on the whole than on, it had less of an impact on the whole and more a greater impact on the individual. It absolutely radically changed the way I taught, because I was forced for the first time ever to think about what is it that a student should be able to do, or what is it that a student should know by the time they left my class. And I know that many faculty members like myself, when we wrote our syllabus, we put things in there, and then we devoted our teaching and our evaluation as to whether students could accomplish those goals or not. And I know lots of faculty members who that had the effect. It certainly had the effect on me. I found it frustrating to implement at a larger level other than the individual classroom. But for an individual like me and for others, it really had a strong.
Jim, I think that was my experience as well. That it did affect us individually. I know it was not uncommon for me to grab the textbook, outline the table of contents, and see how many weeks I could spread it out, and that was the course.
Yeah.
And then when we started requiring, and my memory is the same as yours, we did say, with your syllabus now, we want you to outline what are those outcomes, what are those results or competencies that you expect your students to have as a result of your course. And tell us how you're going to get them there and assess for it.
Yeah.
And of course, assessing for it was new to faculty, new to education in general. But it was easier to do in the context of a given course, or even a major for that matter, than it was across the whole body of general studies and the college as a whole. And I think that's why, in part, it atrophied over time. It was just, well, to bring everyone together on each of those and the way we assess it was a monumental task of building consensus. And after a while, it just sort of drifted out.
Were you disappointed that it didn't go further than it did, or were you, what was your reaction to it didn't go all the way to its final conclusion?
No, I don't think I was disappointed with that. I think the excitement of working together to create something new was part of what made it very special to be at Mars Hill at that time. We took pride in what we were doing. We had our colleagues from other institutions, whoa, I hear something good's really happening there. I think all of that was a time of helping us feel like we were doing something educationally significant. The fact that it didn't all come to fruition, get neatly tied up and put in place, I guess as a young academic, I would have expressed disappointment at that. I don't anymore. As Earl Leininger and others have said, those curricular reforms come about every decade. And I think they're really renewal forms. Being at a Baptist institution, I could say they're revivals, you know, you go through that. But I think they just bring a new rethinking of who we are and what we're about. And I really think by focusing on what we wanted our students to be and do and feel to a certain extent, helped us mature as a senior college. And I expect right now, not having me back here for a decade, that you would find a lot of that still in this community. Not necessarily expressed that way anymore, but it still is part of the identity of the institution.
I was going to ask you, you left in 1982, and it was in that period of time right before that and then considerably years after it that the college had difficulties with enrollment and that sort of stuff. You feel comfortable talking about how that might have affected Dick and how it affected Fred Bentley for those difficult years that they had to go through?
Affected both of them severely, in my judgment. It particularly Dick. It really wore Dick down. He was always Dick. There was as I kidded him for years, I always thought of him as a cork on the water. You know, you push him down under and it's back up over here, and he's just there. He knock him down for a while, but you're not going to keep him down. But I think the having to deal with folk in any way that affected them adversely was hard for Dick. Now, as a dean, he did it. I mean, he didn't shy away from times when you had to tell folk it's just not working out. And he would deal with that. Fortunately, we were growing during a lot of that time, didn't have much of that to deal with. But in the 80s, that turned. And then it was having to pull back, having to restrict resources, having to tell people, no, we can't go and get that and do that. And it was at that point that Dick really began to pull back a bit from his leadership role. Now, I wasn't here during the late 80s, but Dick was my mentor during much of that early time, and I would, 3 or 4 times a year, we get together, have dinner, talk. New Year's Eve, we'd end up with the family at the Hoffman's house, you know, and just spend the night on our way back to wherever we lived and wherever we were going. So there was a closeness there that we had, and I noticed that my conversations with Dick changed during that time. And I think there's a sense in which you could say Dick Hoffman really gave his life to Mars Hill College. I think it took him, not because of anyone intentionally. It was just, he was so committed to the well-being of others that it hurt him badly when he was not able to foster that the way he wanted. Fred was, I did not sense Fred was as directly affected by that, although much of the enthusiasm Fred had that came from vision of where they were going went out during that period of time. Fred went sort of flat. Now he still put him in a pressure situation, such as when I was at Tusculum College as president, I was involved with Fred in establishing the Appalachian College Consortium, which still today is thriving and does a good work. But Fred was the one all of the presidents turned to and said, chair us and lead us. We need to make this happen. And you'd see the old fire come back. You put him in that situation. But he and I would travel over and back together 3 or 4 times a year to that. And just in the car, a bit of weariness that came from, I think it hurt him particularly in the early to mid 80s when the banks pulled back and said, "No, we're not going to carry you through this."
Right.
And there's every reason to believe the college was going to get through it. It wasn't that type of disaster, but he took that personally, and he's not going to dwell on it, not going to talk at length about it, but it left its mark.
I see.
And I did not sense in either Fred or Dick just that outpouring of enthusiastic leadership that was there for the first 20 years. The last 10 were struggles.
Do you think that's inevitable for most college administrators? There's a certain point in time where you kind of burn out or tire out or maybe perhaps lose your creativity?
I think that's a general pattern. I think there are some who can transcend that and do. Many transcend it by moving to another institution.
Right.
And there's sort of that new birth, that enthusiasm that comes with it. Of course, Fred Dick didn't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't want to do that. So I think it's hard to sustain that during that period of time. And I think it comes, use myself as an example. I was asked several years ago, Bob, you've been in college administration for over 30 years now. What have you learned? And I said, well, I learned that when I took my first presidency, that when I said, we've got some great ideas here, we want to do some things, and we need to raise some money to see that they're done. Those great ideas didn't mean anything. It was, we've got to raise some money to see that they're done. I mean, that was the thing everyone heard.
Right.
And then secondly, when I first started in, students' behavior it could aggravate me and frustrate me. After I'd been in it a little while, it just sort of amused me. I mean, there's a certain detachment that comes. We've been down that road quite a few times. And I think you get to that stage. Okay, we're going through another curricular revision. Okay, we've been down that road several times, and let's do it for the group that's here now. But it wasn't going to be the same as that first, maybe even that second time, when Fred and Dick were right in the middle of their major contributions to the college.
Interesting. You came back to Mars Hill College, well, you came to Mars Hill College and then came back to Mars Hill College a couple of times after that. Why come back?
Trying to get it right, you know. You keep coming back and trying, maybe this time.
I won't let you get away with that.
In the first time I've talked about Dick and the recruitment and all that was exciting there and came, and that really established for me an outlook on my educational career at that point. Jim, I pastored a church very briefly, Presbyterian church. And after I'd been there about a year and a half, the chairman of the session, the chairman of the board of elders, his name was Duncan Campbell. How's that for a good Presbyterian? He called me one day and said, Bob, let's go to lunch. Great. So I went to lunch with him. We sat down, we ordered. He said, Bob, I want to tell you, you are an exceptional teacher. Well, in the Presbyterian church, a teaching elder is the minister. So I thought, well, thank you, Duncan, I appreciate it. He said, no, now listen to me. You are an exceptional teacher. I said, Duncan, I think I should listen to what you're not saying as much as what you are saying. He said, now we have an understanding. Let's have lunch and go home from here.
Right.
But his point was well taken. I was not near the minister that I should have been. And so I turned to education, and my home was there. Coming into my work at Mars Hill, Dick gave me, Fred gave me that opportunity to move over into administration. I found that I enjoyed the conceptual side and building consensus among the folk, and of course I'd seen Dick as a model to that. When I got out a while, I was a dean at a couple of other places. I ran into a rough spot, and about 1980 when I came back here, I was at another Baptist institution that wanted to take a very conservative turn, and I was not the one to help them at that point. So Dick and Fred gave me a chance to come back and work, and we worked on some proposals, and at that time they were anticipating these financial problems that were coming. And so I came back, worked for a while with you and your colleagues and others, and then moved on. In '99, when I came back, that was after having been president of Tusculum for a decade. Mars Hill was struggling again in some ways, and for me, that was a way of trying to pay back what the place had meant to me.
Yeah.
Now, Dick and Fred were not here.
Right.
Dick was gone, had passed, and Fred was still living at that time. And I went down to the lake house and talked with him and looked at that. But I really, looking back on that decision was driven largely by a desire to try to help where I had been helped greatly by the people of this place. And you and your colleagues, many of you were still here at that time that I knew coming up. Many of them we had hired during that time when I was Dick's associate. Probably not the best choice for me of the institution at that stage, just because of the struggles that were going on. But that's what brought me back here. And my faith in the faculty was fully confirmed in that general education program that you and others led. And again, it was groundbreaking in its own way. Very strong multi or interdisciplinary components of that. And C. Robert Jones was talking earlier about the faculty forum or the book forum, where we would get together, read, and talk about some ideas in common. That goes way back to the early 70s. And a grant we had from Kellogg to get support for that, but it was a vehicle to get a common intellectual community founded among the faculty across our disciplines and backgrounds. And the readings came really right out of Phoenix in terms of where he referred us to some of those materials. I remember one of the first books we read was F.S.C. Northrup's Logic of the Sciences and the Humanities. I think we read his Man, Nature, and God, but it was your audience have no idea what I'm talking about here, but it was a set of thoughts by a law professor at Yale who was very interdisciplinary in his approach to life and meaning and purpose. And we had some wonderful conversations. It was all voluntary. We got the money, we'll give you a little book. If you want to read it, come up, sit down and talk. And we started them up, top floor, up in Dick's office up there, Moore Hall. And I remember we had to move out of there over to a classroom the first time or two. So there's so many that wanted to be part of it. And that was a wonderful gift to me. Just, that wasn't intended as a gift to me, but it was an inspirational experience on my part to see faculty really willing to give of themselves in that way. Long days, papers, all that, it's still coming. And pursue something that wasn't going to advance your career in terms of a paper to be published or something that's going to take you right back into the classroom. It was just a common intellectual experience.
Well, that may have been the catalyst for something that I saw in all my years here, is that you can't have a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary program unless the disciplines can communicate with one another and understand each other's perspective in many ways. It doesn't work unless you have that. And I can remember maybe not so much going to book discussions, but a tradition of Mars Hill College of faculty of different perspectives getting together and trying to help each other understand their disciplines so they can put together a synoptics course under the first curriculum, or this liberal arts and action curriculum that we have now. But that Kellogg grant and what you did there may have set that tradition that it was possible in a school like this to really make a course interdisciplinary and actually have people work cooperatively one another to make it work.
I like to think it did, Jim. That's what, when you hear me say, I think part of the identity of the college was formed there and still continues. I found that in '99 when I came back, working with the faculty, that commitment to work with each other. Protect what's of interest to me, but being willing to reach out to others. When that meant reading, and in that curricular group, remember we did some readings where we had to come in and talk to others across the lines and all. You mentioned the synoptics or worldview seminar in that first curriculum, and of course synoptics is a division of knowing that Phoenix talks about, putting it all together to make a whole out of what you've learned and really go to first principles, what you build. And I remember your lectures very favorably, where you would lecture we'd have those big common lectures, and we'd go off into our groups, and I'd worked with and taught Confucius for a while, but your lectures on Confucius really helped clarify things for me. I still have notes that I can find right now from what you said and how you went down to first principles and helped me understand it. And I guess one of the most challenging experiences I ever had was to go off with a group, I think there were 5 of us, in that worldview seminar where we each had to express our worldview. And then our colleagues, and it wasn't an open session, it was a closed, we were in that room together. But I never will forget presenting mine and having someone like Earl Leininger say, "Bob, you really believe that?" And it was done with a great sense of humor, but it was also, I don't think you can defend that. You really need to think about it. And as I've joked often, you went in with a worldview and came out saying, I don't have any idea what I believe anymore.
It's changed already.
But it was a wonderful experience. It was a humbling experience to expose yourself that way, because those were not, they were disciplinary informed because we all came from and worked in those disciplines, each different. But they weren't bound by that. You really had to pull other things in. And some of those lectures in the common session, I remember, in fact, Earl sent me, when I was back here earlier in '99, sent me a set of tapes that he had found where we taped those lectures. And it's amazing how weird and strange we sound when we go back that far and listen to ourselves make those comments. But those were all growing and learning experiences that I don't think you can duplicate just by being off on a professional career.
Absolutely not. And again, my own view is that the environment that you and Bentley and Hoffman created a level of trust among faculty members where they could get together, that they could give a lecture in front of their colleagues and not feel threatened by it, or to have these meetings where they discussed some very basic principles of their own and can do it in a safe and secure way. And I think that, in a sense, had an effect on our teaching to try to create that environment for our students as well.
Jim, I remember one that Earl Leininger, Paige Lee did, dealing with Baptist life. And they presented for a group, for our students. I think we had, 5 of us, 20 students apiece, about 100 students in that seminar in the junior year, if my memory is correct, that we did all that. And we were there in the Elk Auditorium having the discussion. And they presented fundamentals of Baptist life as they knew them, remembered them, at a time when the moral majority was beginning to form. It's on its early stages, but it was coming, and you're beginning to get those movements in Baptist life toward a much more rigorous conservative side than the Mars Hill community. And I know it came out of that early on, but it had taken a little different direction there under Dick and Fred. And they presented that, and I then went off with my students to our seminar, and we talked about that. And it was amazing how many of them said, I never knew that about that's not what I'd learned Baptists were all about. And of course, what these students were saying were what they had been taught.
Yeah.
And it was much more narrow perspective. Not the Baptist church I grew up in, which
right.
was, well, I had a Sunday school teacher who was a dispensationalist, and he taught you every Sunday, you know, the signs and the end of the world was out here and coming. And my dad, who was, I think the most reading he ever did was probably trade journals for Shell magazine, you know,
right.
Dad just service station operator all those years. But you'd go out, and this fellow's name was Milstead. I remember Mr. Milstead. And we'd start into church, and my dad would turn to him and say, Wilbur, I see you're still here. We must be all right. And they'd laugh and joke about that, but at two ends of the spectrum.
Right.
Well, that was part of what I saw in the Mars Hill community, Baptist.
Well, I think it's something you helped create as well.
I hope so.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
Very much.